Well, good evening, everybody. This is Dom from Dom Limited, or not Dom Limited, but uh, yes, Dom Limited here from Rindle's Computer Service. And actually, it was a rather interesting day. And what I mean by that is, I went on another consulting call today and went back to the same parochial school that I went or stopped by yesterday to take a look at their email server and domain system. And what I found out today was when I actually got a monitor and a keyboard, and it amazes me that they're using a DOS 2008 or a GUI interface like Windows 7 or XP or Vista or 2000, just kind of set up as a server. No, not even that. It was a fairly old computer from like 2008, 2009, like a Dell Inspiron Celeron processor running basically DOS as their server. Except I think it not wasn't strictly DOS. I think it was BDS or BSD. Basically, it's a DOS. And going through all the initial tests and all troubleshooting, I kept coming back with no DHCP or DNS. And one thing I learned from some of the people that worked at the school was that, of course, no documentation. And I can't stress that enough, that if you're working on stuff, keep a master boot log of everything you do, or a master record or master document stating what usernames, passwords, protocols, what IP addresses are assigned to what devices, what security infrastructure you're running, what antivirus programs you're running, what firewall port numbers, any group policy editing policies on the documentation, any improvements you've done or updates you've done to the system, stuff like that. The place, I'm not going to name where it is or what organization, but I walked in there, and you know how kind of cringy it is when you're working on stuff and you can't figure what the heck you're doing, because nobody really knows much of what the other person's doing. It's just not a free for all, but it's just the original guy that was doing it, he quit, went somewhere else. And they picked up another guy that was a consultant that was working on it. And the interesting story about that consultant is I'm actually sitting in his old office. He pulled out, I moved in. Back in February and January, I was looking for a bigger place to work, because I was working out of a small room in the basement of the house I live in. And I just didn't have the room to, and I didn't want stuff all over the house. And this wonderful place came in the retrospect, and I took it. And it's an improvement from what I had. So I'm not trying to get off topic here, but that consultant, he didn't want to do it no more. I have no clue why. Then they hired some fly by night guy. He came in, did some bang up work. He left. And now I'm in the picture, and I'm trying to figure out all the dipstick mistakes that this last person made with the last two guys that were in there were reputable people. They just didn't want to do it anymore, but I'll eventually figure out the real reason why nobody wants that consulting job. Finances are limited there, so that's a factor. The building is I would say, like an 1898 school building. No, maybe it's a little newer than that, but it's old. See, it's hard to run cabling through the building because the ceilings don't line up. And you got to drill through like 3 feet thick of field stone to get in places. So the upstairs isn't field stone, but the basement, it's a field stone foundation framed out in cinder block and 2x4 is framed on top of that yet with kind of like a carpet texture. Basically, the layout of the school building is you got 4 entrances on the building. All or 3 entrances, you go up flights to step up to the main floor, which is the top floor. And then you have your couple of classrooms, 1 hallway, and then you got 2 flights of steps where you basically got 2 classrooms in between floors adjoining the one corner of the building, which basically wraps around. So you go through 1 room, you got a boys' bathroom in between the basement and the upstairs. And there's a classroom, another classroom, storeroom. And the other side, there's another room. Crap, I'm trying to. I have to go back to the building again and take a look. But one thing that's really cool about when you go to buildings like that, you kind of get to learn the layout of it, and you learn a lot about the architecture. And yes, I am getting off topic again, but oh well, it's just one of those. It was actually a kind of neat looking building. Even though that this is strictly about documentation and infrastructure of all the weird things that they implemented into their network, you got to take into consideration then. It is what it is, and they're trying to do the best they can to keep up with technology, but cost is just a big limited factor on your schools like that. They're nice people that run the school, and but as far as server upgrades, that poor excuse of a server that as they call a server, which is really a desktop with a Celeron processor running basically a DOS program as a server, an operating system. It's just kind of inadequate for what they're doing. There's no structure. There's no GUI interface to work with. It's kind of you type one command in, you could screw the whole thing up, and then what do you have? So basically, my recommendations to them is there's 2 different approaches you can take. You can take a regular desktop computer, run a program called VMware, and you'd be able to run virtual servers for your email and domain controllers and any other servers that you need. Or you could just buy the physical servers, which they're not cheap. And then you'd have to buy a server license. Now, when you buy like a copy of Windows 7 or Windows 10, one thing you have to keep in mind is if you go on eBay, you can get them cheap, but now when you're buying server operating systems like Server 2012 or 16, you're probably going to pay a little under $1,000 for the software. It's not the disk itself that costs so much money, and it's not the piece of paper or the little inadequate literature that comes with it, or the plastic casing around that costs so much. It's the stupid license key That's so expensive. And on top of that, you also pay per connection to the server. So if you have like 50 computers, I honestly I'd have never priced this how much it costs, but for each connection, you gotta pay per connection. So you're probably talking a little over 100,000 to completely do. Well, not 100,000 to license all those computers, but I'm thinking it's probably like 50, $60 a computer to get us. When you're playing with it in VMware the workstation, and you're running a preview or a demo or an evaluation, you don't pay for that stuff because they want you to like it so much that you will pay. So that's another benefactor. And the problem with Linux servers are, sure, Linux is out there, but then you go back to the core or the core edition where it's just all commands. It's harder to manage without a GUI interface than it would if you just had a regular GUI server operating system. If you know what I'm trying to get at here, even though it's cheaper to go that route, but if you pay a little bit more money, make it a little easier on yourself to have a GUI interface than a core interface. Because basically the core is like a shell command line. All it is just commands. You don't get to click on fancy looking buttons and stuff like that. So, and cost is it's kind of what kills a lot of projects. You think, oh, I'd love to do this. I'd love to build myself a custom built or build myself a server. But the thing is, you gotta do your homework before you make such hasty decisions on buying products. And in their case, it to redo it like that again, it's not justifiable because when you need to work on it, it's nearly impossible to be able to fully execute all the commands. Even though online there's wonderful resources for figuring out what each command is and how to execute it correctly. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna advise them to go with the GUI interface. Of course, upgrade that, get rid of that computer and get something more server related. So what else we would do is upgrade some of their networking equipment, put some gigabit switches in, maybe upgrade some of their computers if I can talk them into it. That's what their finances are. If they can pull enough money in where we can accomplish some of these major technology upgrades. Christ, they're still running on Windows XP yet. So how? And they're hooked up to the internet, of course. Even though XP doesn't work on the internet anymore, but there's opening a lot of vulnerabilities up to threats online, malware, Trojan horses, and they wonder why they got such problems. So I would advise upgrading it to like 10 Pro. Even though I hate 10 with a passion, but you don't have a lot of different options here. So basically, that's now I just have to write that plan into effect so they can decide, okay, well, Rindle's going to go ahead and upgrade this, but I need to. But before I go any further with the computers, I want to get that server business figured out, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to be able to do anything with it. So that's unfortunate but that's not even the main point of what I'm getting at here. What I found out was the original gentleman that was doing their websites and domain services and stuff. Apparently, he didn't tell us what any of the passwords and stuff were. So now we got to sit there and struggle and try to. And the company that he did it through, you can't get a hold of them. You can only fax them. That's the only way you can get a hold of them. And then every time you send a fax, it just comes back either unsendable or jammed. So it kind of teased me off a little bit. But what can you do? I'm not naming names of that company either. I'm sure they have reputable sites, but when you have it where it doesn't, where you can't, where your domain expires, that's what's causing no email or domain services. So that tells me, even though the subscription is good until 2021, but for it to expire now, basically what happened was, unbeknownst to me, the secretary of the church, I'm not naming what church either, they were trying to renew some part of it for the parish site, and I guess the email was also tied into it somehow because basically nobody has a working email or any or working website or anything, school resources or church resources. So everybody's pretty much in incognito at the moment. So what we're going to try to do is get it set up so that they can keep running. And obviously, wasn't going to happen today, and it may not be Monday either. It might be Tuesday before, and that's if I can find somebody or another consultant to assist me with the server upgrade, because I don't feel comfortable doing the full-blown configurational part of the server, because I'm a oh gosh, why am I even going into this? Well, basically, another interesting thing to throw out there is don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to outsource things if you're not 100% sure on. I would rather make sure it gets done right than fudge something by accident and then think, what the heck how am I going to fix that? So let's just put this out there. Not every IT person knows everything about everything. What I mean by that is most IT guys, they know a lot of stuff, but they don't know everything. They're not God. They're just only human. And there are certain people that know a little bit more about different topics than others, but it is what it is. Some people have different experience in different areas, and then there's other people that have different experience in different areas and not in the same. Well, it's like somebody that works on TVs, for instance, and they very rarely do a computer. They're not going to know that much about the computers because they don't do a lot of. They do more repair on TVs and troubleshooting and testing of them. But basically, it's a lot of it's, or some of it's pretty much straightforward. Not all of it is, but some is. So another thing we got to look at here is we also want something that's easy for them to use because they're the end users, even though they're not going to be fixing any of this, and I'm the only one that's going to be the admin over the system. But you got to keep in mind that you want something that or an interface that's easy to use. You don't want it so complicated that you can't get it going. So on that note, I'll worry about when Monday comes around again. So another thing to talk about is, actually, I think we're pretty much okay. One thing you got to realize is when you're doing domain stuff and you're transferring domains from one site to another, you could potentially lose any online content on your like Google Suites. So that's one thing that you have to be careful of, because you don't know if you're gonna lose any important data. And one thing to be exact is always keep it up to date on who's on your system and who's not on your system. For any people that are not on your system, the correct security protocol is if you get a user that's no longer part of your organization, I would just kind of suspend their account. That's for good security and privacy, good for privacy and security reasons, so that they can't come back in and lollygag around and goof around and do something stupid. Been going pretty much early this morning already. So basically, what you want to do in a case like that is make a list of who's currently in your organization, like I said, or if they do something unconscionable, then of course you probably could suspend their account for a time being until they learn to behave themselves. And I know I've done that with people in the past in organizations that I've worked with, technology or kids and stuff they got at hand, and you would just basically kind of lock their account so they couldn't log in and do anything. You didn't do it permanently, just for a while to kind of show them what was acceptable and what wasn't. And a lot of them, they got so upset about it, they didn't pull those stunts again. So I guess it takes some or losing something to appreciate what you have. So that's, and one other topic we're gonna cover real quick is, so basically tech support thought that the email was too full for emails to be sent and received, but that wasn't the case because they don't keep any of their emails anyway. They just delete them instantaneously. So how can that take up space when you don't keep them anyway? So that's kind of something that I kind of thought as well. But the whole thing about domains expiring and stuff, that could be a very strong possibility that it expired, even though it's going until 2021. But I'm sure you gotta verify that you're still using it in some way. I don't know. I'm not an expert on domains and email services and stuff like that. But if I were them, I would keep better documentation, and eventually I'll probably just have to sit down there and just kind of do it for them because they're probably not going to want to do it. So on that note, it's getting late, and we will talk some other day when if you got something interesting that comes up. So on that note, you all take care, and we'll see you tomorrow.